A flight attendant rammed a drink cart into a black CEO's back. What the CEO did next made every passenger hold their breath. He thought pain would humble a man who rose too high. He didn't realize the wheels he pushed would soon roll back over him. Subscribe if you believe no cruelty should ever go unpunished. The drink cart hit the side of Elias Monroe's seat with a loud, metallic clank, rattling the glasses stacked on top and jerking him slightly forward. He turned his head, startled but composed. The cart's metal corner had scraped against the polished armrest with a roughness that didn't match the calm ambiance of Altair Air's first-class cabin. Behind it stood a tall flight attendant, his face impassive, jaw tight. His name tag read D. Cole. Elias locked eyes with him for a brief moment and offered a polite nod. "Would you like a drink, sir?" Darren Cole's voice was crisp, nearly clipped, with no hint of warmth or welcome. His posture was too rigid for hospitality, and his expression lingered just a second too long. Elias adjusted his navy tie with slow precision, eyes scanning Darren's face. "Still water, please." Darren turned without a word, mechanically retrieving a bottle and placing it down with a dull thunk on the tray before him. The bottle stood upright, unopened. Elias offered a tight smile, lifting it himself and twisting the cap with ease. There was no thank you, no glance, no acknowledgement. The attendant had already pushed the cart forward, bumping the edge of the next seat as he passed. Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. He was a man used to being respected, never pampered, but acknowledged. This wasn't just poor service. It was intentional. He leaned back against the plush leather of his seat, eyes drawn to the low hum of soft, ambient lighting overhead. Around him, suits and ties filled the rows, other executives, consultants, perhaps investors en route to the same Geneva summit. His own company, Virion Systems, was on the verge of revolutionizing clean tech. The proposal he was scheduled to deliver would position them as the global leader in sustainable infrastructure. He should have been focused entirely on that. But something was off. 2 rows behind, Marcus Devereaux glanced up from his tablet, catching the exchange. His dark eyes flicked between the flight attendant and Elias, the furrow in his brow deepening. Marcus had served as Elias's right hand for nearly 6 years, and he knew when his boss sensed trouble. Elias took a slow breath and exhaled, shifting slightly to ease the tension growing in his shoulders. He tried to refocus on the annotated investor brief open on the seat screen in front of him, but his attention drifted back to Darren, who was now at the galley, speaking in low tones to another male flight attendant. Their posture was oddly formal, shoulders stiff, glances darting down the aisle and then quickly away. One of them looked directly at Elias and just as quickly turned. Odd. The plane continued its slow ascent, the gentle tilt of the cabin pushing weight into the seatbacks. Elias settled deeper into his chair, arms relaxed, but his mind racing. He'd boarded this flight like he had dozens before, efficient, composed, a man with a mission. But beneath the luxurious finish of this aircraft, beneath the silence of silk suits and gentle clinks of ice in tumblers, something was already brewing. When Darren returned down the aisle, this time without the cart, he paused near Elias's row again. He stood too long, as though checking the overhead bin, but said nothing. Then, in a strange move, he leaned slightly over Elias's shoulder and asked, "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" The question felt less like a courtesy and more like a dare. Elias turned to meet his eyes. "It's fine, thank you," he said, his tone even. Darren nodded and walked away, but the way he moved, deliberate, almost theatrical, was unsettling. Elias shifted in his seat again, not from discomfort, but from instinct. He didn't know this man, but something in Darren's expression, controlled but simmering, felt personal. He glanced down at his phone, flicking quickly through messages. No alerts, no missed calls. He tapped a note to himself. Unusual crew behavior. Monitor. It wasn't paranoia. Not for someone who'd spent the past 2 years fending off corporate threats, hostile bids, and internal leaks. It paid to be cautious. From his peripheral vision, Elias saw Marcus rise and approach him with a quiet murmur. "Everything all right?" "Not yet a problem," Elias replied, his voice low. "But keep your eyes open." Marcus nodded and returned to his seat. Outside the window, clouds parted briefly, revealing a sliver of ocean far below. Inside, the cabin remained silent save for the occasional clink of utensils or rustle of magazines. But in Elias's mind, gears had started to turn. The world of business had taught him many things: how to read a room, how to predict a market, how to spot a bluff before it landed. But it had also taught him one of the most important lessons. Danger often comes dressed in protocol. He closed his eyes for a moment, feigning rest, but his mind stayed sharp. Something about Darren's gaze lingered in his memory, like someone who recognized you but pretended not to, or someone with a grudge too deep to hide. His breathing slowed, steady and measured. He wouldn't act yet. He needed more. Observation first, action later. 2 rows back, Marcus resumed typing but kept his gaze subtly forward, his fingers slower now, his eyes more focused. He, too, had sensed the shift. In first class, everything looked clean, ordered, and premium. But the silence was heavy, the kind of silence that preceded a storm. Elias opened his eyes again as the intercom crackled overhead, a male voice announcing the cruising altitude. The lights dimmed slightly. The hum of engines deepened, and just then Darren passed again, his shoulder brushing Elias's with unnecessary closeness. Elias didn't flinch. He simply turned, eyes calm, spine straight. Whatever this was, it wasn't just bad service. It was beginning. Sometimes hostility hides behind a uniform. The metal slammed into Elias's lower back with a sickening thud. He lurched forward in his seat, a sharp cry escaping his throat before he could suppress it. A stabbing pain radiated from the base of his spine up through his ribs, hot and blinding. His hands gripped the armrests as his vision blurred momentarily from the shock. The sudden agony silenced the low murmur of the cabin. For a moment, the hum of the jet engines was the only sound. Gasps erupted around him. A businessman in the adjacent row paused mid-sentence. A woman across the aisle froze with her tablet still lit in her hands. The flight attendant, Darren Cole, stood motionless behind the cart, his expression a mixture of cold indifference and something else Elias couldn't quite place. Not fear, not guilt, something harder, something practiced. I'm fine," Elias muttered under his breath, forcing himself upright. His voice trembled, but only slightly. He didn't want to give Darren the satisfaction of seeing him break. His jaw clenched as the pain throbbed beneath his tailored suit. Sweat was already forming at his brow, not from panic, but from control, trying not to show the damage done. Darren didn't move. "Sir," he said curtly, "apologies." That was turbulence. Nothing more. His voice was flat, clinical, too rehearsed. Elias turned his head slowly, meeting Darren's eyes. They were steel gray, impassive. But something flickered beneath them. Not remorse, not concern. Recognition. "I see," Elias replied quietly. "Just turbulence." Darren gave a quick, almost imperceptible nod and grabbed the handles of the cart again, ready to move on. But Marcus Devereaux, Elias's assistant, had already unbuckled from 2 rows back and was pushing through the narrow aisle. His brows were furrowed, his suit jacket wrinkled from haste. He dropped to a knee beside Elias's seat, eyes scanning his boss's face and then flicking up to Darren's retreating form. "What happened?" he whispered urgently. "What did he do?" Elias's lips barely moved. "He slammed it into my back." Hard Marcus stood upright and turned toward the attendant, his voice rising. "Hey, what the hell was that?" Several passengers leaned closer now, eyes darting between Marcus and Darren. A few had already pulled out their phones, filming discreetly over the tops of their tray tables. Darren glanced over his shoulder with a neutral expression. The cart slipped during turbulence. It was an accident. Elias inhaled deeply, straightening his tie as if reassembling his composure piece by piece. "Marcus," he said quietly, placing a firm hand on his assistant's arm. "Don't escalate it." Not yet. Marcus hesitated, jaw tight. Then he stepped aside and returned to his seat, though his eyes never left Darren. The flight resumed its strange rhythm. The soft clinking of ice in glasses returned. The engines droned. But the mood had shifted entirely. An invisible line had been crossed, and everyone knew it. Elias sat back, his posture rigid. Pain pulsed steadily in his back, but he focused on slowing his breathing, on maintaining the image. His mind was already cataloging everything: the angle of the cart, Darren's expression, the reactions from the surrounding passengers. He'd been in enough corporate battles to know when something wasn't a fluke. This wasn't. The incident itself was calculated. Not just the blow, but the calm that followed it. Darren's entire demeanor had changed, not in apology, but in challenge. From his seat, Elias looked down at the edge of the tray table, still locked in place. A subtle metallic smear of something, a scuff from the cart, or maybe from his suit fabric, marked the surface. Evidence, maybe, or just a reminder. He shifted slightly and winced again. He couldn't shake the feeling that Darren had been watching him long before this flight. There was something too specific in his hostility. It hadn't been random service neglect. It had been steady, deliberate. Earlier, Elias had requested a napkin. Darren had delivered it with such force it nearly fluttered off the tray. A request to adjust the leg rest had been met with an eye roll and a muttered comment. And now, this. It wasn't personal. Elias felt it in his bones. It was tactical, targeted. Behind him, Marcus was already typing something on his phone, fingers moving fast. Documentation. Good. Smart. A whisper drifted from across the aisle. "Did you see that?" He didn't even say, "Sorry." A younger man, maybe early 30s, leaned toward his companion and mouthed something. Another passenger nodded silently. Elias adjusted his posture again, slow and deliberate. He would not show pain. He would not hand Darren that victory. Not here, not now. And yet, in the silence between moments, the question festered. Why? Why him? He closed his eyes for a moment, thinking back. No obvious connection, no memory of the man. But something about Darren's gaze when the cart hit, that flash of something buried, made Elias feel like he had just become the center of a story he hadn't agreed to join. Whatever the reason, the intent had been clear. And it wasn't over. As Darren disappeared down the aisle, pretending to resume routine duties, Elias opened his eyes and stared straight ahead, the corner of his mouth tightening. Accidents don't glare back. The impact was brutal. The metal corner of the drink cart slammed into Elias Monroe's lower back with a thud that echoed above the drone of the engines. The pain was instant, white-hot, sharp, and blinding. It shot through his spine and spread like lightning through his shoulders. Elias gasped, his hands gripping the armrests, knuckles white. The world tilted as he struggled to stay upright, every nerve in his body screaming. Marcus Devereaux was already unbuckling from 2 rows back, rushing forward with a stunned expression. "Elias!" he called, his voice cracking with urgency. His shoes thudded against the carpeted floor as he reached the aisle, brushing past stunned passengers frozen in place. Flight attendant Darren Cole stood motionless, one hand still on the cart handle. "Apologies, sir," he muttered, but his voice held no sincerity. His eyes, however, flickered with something darker, resentment, maybe satisfaction. His smirk barely lingered before disappearing beneath a mask of feigned professionalism. Elias didn't respond immediately. He sat motionless, spine rigid, breathing in shallow gasps through clenched teeth. The cabin around him pulsed with a quiet storm, soft gasps, the rustle of phones being raised discreetly, and the low hum of nervous whispers. One passenger tilted his phone slightly, camera lens catching the moment. Another glanced around anxiously, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Above them, the captain's voice broke through the intercom, calm and unaware. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising at 36,000 feet. Smooth sailing ahead. Sit back and relax." Elias closed his eyes for a moment, collecting himself. The captain's words rang with bitter irony. Nothing about this flight felt smooth anymore. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked, crouching beside him, his face tight with concern. "No," Elias whispered, "but I will be." Slowly, he shifted in his seat, biting down the pain as he straightened his posture with forced control. His eyes locked on Darren, who was now pretending to adjust the cart, acting as if nothing had happened. Elias's voice, when it came, was low and calm enough to freeze the blood in one's veins. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." The sentence hung in the air like a blade. Darren's hands paused mid-motion, and for the first time, the smirk faded completely. The smoldering confidence in his posture cracked, just slightly. Marcus looked between them, sensing the shift. "We need to report this," he said under his breath. His fingers were already moving across his phone screen, sending a message directly to Varayan's legal counsel, attaching a brief summary of the incident, and requesting immediate documentation upon landing. Elias nodded faintly but kept his eyes on Darren, watching the flicker of nervous energy begin to rise in the man's eyes. Something about the attendant's behavior gnawed at him. It wasn't just hostility. It was calculated, personal. The rest of the cabin gradually resumed motion, but an invisible line had been drawn. A bubble of dread surrounded row 2, and everyone near it could feel the chill. Elias leaned back slowly, exhaling as the pressure on his back eased. Pain still throbbed with each movement, but his mind was now sharper than ever. Something wasn't right. Darren retreated down the aisle, stiffly maneuvering the cart out of view. Marcus remained beside Elias, whispering, "That wasn't an accident. You saw the way he looked at you." "I did," Elias replied, eyes narrowed, "and I've seen it before." He didn't elaborate, not yet, but in his gut, he knew this wasn't random aggression or poor training. It had the scent of something buried deeper. His thoughts raced back to a boardroom 6 months ago, an emergency termination hearing, a man named Mitchell Cole, and financial documents riddled with fraudulent patterns. The man had left Virion in disgrace, vowing revenge. Darren Cole. The same last name. The same cold stare. The connection clicked like a puzzle piece sliding into place. His hand trembled slightly, not from pain, but from the clarity of it all. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a setup, and he had walked right into it at 36,000 feet. Still seated, Elias turned slightly toward Marcus and whispered, "Find out if Darren Cole has a brother named Mitchell. Don't ask anyone here. Use secure lines." Marcus gave a firm nod and moved back to his seat, already opening an encrypted channel on his work device. As Elias adjusted in his seat, trying to find a position that didn't send sharp pain through his spine, he stared out the window. The clouds below were serene, a white sea stretching endlessly beneath the wing. Yet inside the cabin, a storm had already begun. He watched Darren reappear at the far end of the aisle, whispering something to a younger crew member. They glanced toward Elias, then quickly looked away as if caught doing something wrong. It wasn't just Darren. Someone else was involved. The layers were beginning to peel back, but Elias wasn't ready to make his move yet. He needed information, confirmation, and above all, control. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a gray blazer leaned toward Elias slightly. "I saw it," he whispered. "Got it on video." Elias nodded with polite gratitude. "Thank you. Keep it safe." He turned back, the weight of the moment pressing against him, not just in his back, but in his mind. What had started as a routine flight had turned into something far more dangerous. He could feel the ripples, professional, legal, and personal, already beginning to spread. And yet, despite the agony in his body, despite the swelling storm he felt brewing just beyond the surface, Elias knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. The attack wasn't random. Revenge sometimes wears the face of professionalism. Darren's hand gripped the cart handle tighter as another tremor rolled through the cabin, this one sharper than the last. Passengers around him braced instinctively, their hands clinging to armrests and tray tables. But Darren didn't slow down. He leaned in, muscles tense, and with an almost imperceptible tilt of his wrists, shoved the cart forward, harder than necessary, aimed squarely toward row 3. The metal cart surged ahead, its wheels shrieking against the narrow aisle carpet. Elias Monroe, seated upright with his belt still clipped, turned his head just in time. His instincts flared. Something was wrong. Again. Without thinking, Elias shifted his torso to the side. The movement was fast, but not fast enough. The front wheel clipped his armrest, jolting the entire unit sideways and slamming the sharp metal edge into his hip. He gasped, pain blooming like a hot wire through his side, but Darren wasn't looking at Elias. He had overcommitted to the shove. The cart, thrown off by Elias's deflection and the swaying plane, kicked back like a coiled spring. The bottom corner reared up just as Darren took a step forward. His shin caught first, then, with no time to correct his footing, he pitched forward. His face met the metal rim with a sickening crack. The sound, a wet, violent collision of flesh and steel, cut through the cabin louder than the turbulence. Gasps erupted from nearby seats. A man in 2A half stood, gripping his seat back. The woman beside him flinched and covered her mouth. Phones came out again, screens flickering with red dots and camera icons. But Darren didn't rise. He remained hunched over the cart, blood dripping in thin lines from his mouth onto the beverage tray. One of his front teeth, jagged and cracked, had embedded itself slightly into the plastic housing. He groaned, one hand clawing at the cart's edge, the other grasping his knee. Marcus Devereaux was on his feet immediately, pushing down the aisle with purpose. His face, once pale with restrained fury, was now flush with adrenaline. But before he could step forward, Elias raised a hand. Not high, not angry, just firm and level. "Don't," Elias said. His voice was even, but it carried weight. Enough to stop Marcus mid-step. The other flight attendant, a younger man with thinning blonde hair and anxious eyes, rushed from the galley and skidded to a halt beside Darren. "What happened?" he stammered, eyes wide as they flicked between the blood, the damaged cart, and Elias's face. Elias turned to him with the precision of a man no longer tolerating games. "I suggest," he said coldly, "you start recording your own actions from this point forward." The attendant blinked, taken aback. For a moment he looked ready to argue, but then he caught sight of the passengers behind Elias, phones held high, recording. A silent jury in leather seats and tailored suits. Darren slowly raised himself, spitting blood onto the carpet. His expression had changed. The smirk was gone, replaced with an unfiltered blend of rage and humiliation. But as his eyes locked with Elias's, he saw something worse. Calm. Elias didn't gloat. He didn't taunt. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and tapped a small screen on his phone. The display showed a live feed, grainy but unmistakable. The last 30 minutes of cabin footage captured by a secondary camera lens near his seat. Every moment Darren thought was unobserved. Every glare, every bypass, every purposeful neglect. Elias leaned slightly forward, just enough for Darren to see the app's logo on the screen. Virion Sentinel, a prototype AI safety tool, coded to automatically record and archive data when stress spikes or unusual movement patterns were detected around its user. "You didn't just pick the wrong passenger," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You picked the wrong decade." Marcus's eyes widened at that. The co-attendant stepped back, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. Darren stared at the screen, then Elias, his breath shallow and wheezing through the split in his lip. The captain's voice came through the intercom again, announcing altitude stabilization, but it sounded distant now, irrelevant noise compared to the growing storm in row 3. Darren opened his mouth, maybe to explain or threaten, but nothing came out but the faint taste of blood. And then it clicked. Elias watched as the first flicker of fear passed through Darren's gaze. Not fear of pain, fear of exposure. He knows, Elias thought. He finally understands he's already lost. Marcus slowly lowered back into his seat, watching his boss with something close to awe. A man who didn't shout, who didn't fight, but who dismantled. As the aircraft returned to calm, passengers resumed whispering. One leaned toward another. "That's the CEO of Virion, right?" Elias heard it but didn't turn. He tapped the screen once more, uploading the clip to a secure drive. Darren stood unsteadily now, hand pressed to his mouth, face pale as the blood congealed on his uniform collar. The other flight attendant guided him backward, whispering something Elias couldn't hear, but he didn't need to, because in that moment, with the tension lingering like smoke and the hum of the engines growing louder again, Elias knew the game had changed. Not just the cabin, the boardroom, the world watching. In trying to crush another man's spine, he shattered his own pride. Blood trickled down Darren's lip as he staggered backward, clutching his face in shock and disbelief. The metallic scent of blood mingled with the recycled air of the cabin, sharp and nauseating. His breathing came out in uneven bursts, half fury, half humiliation. Passengers around him froze, their eyes darting between the two men, Elias Monroe, composed but grim, and Darren Cole, trembling with the dawning realization that he had just lost control in front of an entire first-class cabin. The co-attendant, a younger man named Lewis Grant, rushed forward instinctively, his hands raised in uncertainty. But before he could speak, Elias lifted his hand, not with aggression, but with authority so calm it cut through the chaos. "No more games," Elias said evenly, his voice quiet yet commanding enough to silence the murmurs. His tone carried a weight that demanded obedience, not argument. For a heartbeat, even the hum of the engines seemed to pause. The expression on Darren's face hardened into one of rage suppressed by fear, his lips tightening as blood continued to stain his chin. The captain's voice crackled faintly through the intercom, unaware of the storm unraveling below, asking the crew for status updates. But the real status was one of unraveling discipline, an aircraft's carefully built sense of order collapsing under the gravity of one man's misconduct. Lewis hesitated between duty and disbelief. "Darren, let me," he began, but Elias's voice cut across him again, lower now, controlled. "You'll do nothing that compromises safety. Call the captain. Tell him exactly what happened. Every passenger here saw it." His words struck like precision tools, leaving no room for denial. Around them, passengers began to stir, courage growing in the shared outrage. A man in seat 2A raised his phone. "I recorded the whole thing," he said, his voice shaky but resolute. Another nodded from across the aisle, confirming he had done the same. The weight of proof shifted instantly, Darren's arrogance collapsing under the collective judgment of witnesses. The cabin descended into organized chaos. Lewis fumbled for the interphone, reporting the incident to the cockpit. Darren stood motionless, his shoulders heaving, his bloodied reflection visible in the small window of the galley door. "You think you can humiliate me?" he hissed, his voice breaking. Elias met his eyes steadily. "You humiliated yourself," he replied, voice low and measured. Marcus Devereaux appeared beside him, eyes cold with fury but body language restrained. "Captain's been notified," Marcus said, keeping his voice professional. "He's sending security instructions. Darren is to be restrained for the remainder of the flight." The announcement drew gasps, whispers, and a few quiet nods of approval. It was justice unfolding in real time, 40,000 feet above the ground. Darren's defiance cracked. His bravado slipped into something desperate. He looked toward Lewis as if for an ally, but Lewis couldn't meet his gaze. "Sit down," Lewis muttered, torn between fear and shame. The captain's command came moments later through the intercom, clipped and firm. "Restrain Flight Attendant Cole immediately. Maintain calm. We're handling this per safety protocol." The irony was sharp. Elias, the injured passenger, radiated more control than the man supposed to maintain it. As Lewis and another crew member approached with restraint straps, Darren flinched, his pride warring with reason. "This is absurd," he barked, but his words faltered under the collective stare of passengers who had seen everything. The phone cameras pointed at him were merciless mirrors. He slumped finally into a seat near the galley, his head down, knuckles white. Marcus guided the process, ensuring it remained civil but firm, and Elias watched with a steady expression. Beneath his calm, however, his mind raced. Something about Darren's behavior, the precision of his timing, the way he provoked before striking, didn't feel impulsive. It felt planned, calculated. As the captain confirmed control of the situation, Marcus replayed one of the passengers' videos on his tablet. The image was shaky but clear enough to reveal something chilling. Moments before the second attack, Darren's eyes flicked toward his wristwatch. The camera caught a glimmer of his phone screen lighting up in the galley corner, a faint glow from a new message. Marcus paused the frame, zooming in. A logo flashed briefly in the top corner of the text, sharp, geometric, and familiar. "Elias," Marcus whispered, leaning closer. "You need to see this." Elias turned, his brow furrowing as the symbol came into focus. The circular emblem with 3 intersecting lines, it wasn't random. He recognized it instantly. It was the corporate insignia of Arcspan Holdings, Virion's fiercest rival. The same company his firm had exposed months ago for falsifying environmental reports and siphoning government subsidies. But how had their mark appeared on a text message to a flight attendant? His jaw tightened. "Pause it there," he said. "Enhance the image." The timestamp appeared, sent just minutes before Darren's accident. Marcus's pulse quickened as realization set in. "This isn't about your presentation," he said quietly. This was a setup Elias didn't answer right away. He studied Darren, now restrained and trembling, the blood on his lip drying into a dark stain. It didn't add up, a flight attendant turning violent without provocation, and a message from a rival firm arriving moments before the assault. "Arcspan had motive," Elias murmured finally. "They've been desperate to stop our Geneva pitch. If Virion secures that deal, their entire market collapses." His voice hardened. "They couldn't beat us in business, so they tried to destroy us in reputation." Marcus looked around nervously, lowering his voice. "You think they planted him?" Elias nodded slowly. Or bought him. Either way, he wasn't acting alone. The hum of the plane seemed louder now, as though the engines themselves carried secrets. The evidence was fragile, circumstantial, but the pattern was unmistakable. The encrypted text, the targeted aggression, the precision of timing, it all pointed to coordination. He leaned back, forcing calm into his breathing. This wasn't the time for emotion. "We secure everything," he said quietly. "Every video, every angle, every message log. No leaks until we verify." Marcus immediately began organizing files, uploading copies to Virion's encrypted cloud drive. Elias glanced out the window, the darkness of the Atlantic stretching endlessly below. He knew the real turbulence was just beginning, one that wouldn't end when the wheels touched ground. In the corner, Darren muttered something incoherent, the restraints creaking slightly as he shifted. Lewis stood guard nearby, his eyes averted. The power dynamic had flipped completely. Elias now held the control Darren had once abused. Yet beneath the satisfaction was a grim awareness that this victory was only the surface of a deeper war. Somewhere, far from the cabin lights, Someone was watching the aftermath unfold exactly as they had planned, or so they thought. As the captain's voice broke over the intercom again, announcing the flight's remaining duration, Elias's phone vibrated with a new alert from his security division, an encrypted ping from Virion's monitoring system. "Suspicious traffic detected," it read. His stomach tightened. Even at 30,000 feet, the digital battlefield had reached him. He looked toward Marcus and said quietly, "We're not dealing with an accident." This was an opening move. Marcus's eyes widened, but Elias's tone stayed composed. "We'll deal with it on the ground. For now, we stay 2 steps ahead." He turned once more to the restrained man whose silence was now louder than his defiance. Darren refused to meet his gaze. The hum of the engines filled the uneasy quiet between them, carrying the weight of unspoken questions. Elias straightened his tie, his movements deliberate and calm as if reclaiming control piece by piece. His mind, however, was already racing through layers of connections, motives, and threats yet unseen. As the plane sailed steadily through the clouds, the faint glow from Marcus's tablet reflected off Elias's determined eyes. The evidence was there, hidden in pixels and patterns, waiting to be unleashed at the right time. A sense of inevitability hung in the air, a foreshadowing of battles still to come. He looked once more toward the galley where Darren sat defeated, and murmured under his breath, "What began as violence may have been a conspiracy." The jet's wheels screeched against the runway as Altair Air Flight 719 landed under a blanket of gray skies. The cabin, still humming with pressurized air and subdued tension, remained quiet. The moment the seatbelt sign flicked off, 2 uniformed security officers boarded swiftly through the front hatch. Their steps were firm, deliberate. Passengers instinctively leaned away as they approached Darren Cole. Still clutching a crumpled napkin to his bleeding mouth, Darren looked less like the composed flight attendant he had pretended to be, and more like a man cornered by the consequences of his own choices. One officer gestured sharply. "Mr. Cole, you'll come with us." Darren glanced once toward Elias, a mixture of rage and regret flashing across his swollen face. He didn't resist. As he was led past the rows of quietly watching passengers, no one spoke in his defense. There were only lowered eyes, tight lips, and a few camera phones raised in silent documentation. Elias didn't move. He watched calmly, a hand resting against the armrest, his back still aching from the impact. Behind him, Marcus Devereaux stood, tense and alert, gripping a tablet tightly under his arm. He waited until Darren was fully out of view before stepping forward and kneeling beside Elias. "They've taken him through Gate 17. Airport security's coordinating with the authorities now," Marcus whispered. Elias nodded slowly, his face composed, but his muscles tight with restraint. The pain in his lower back pulsed with every breath, but he refused the flight crew's repeated offers of a wheelchair or medical aid. Pride wasn't the reason, control was. "I want legal and comms on standby before I leave this plane," Elias said, voice low, controlled, "and I need a secure link to Andre in cybersecurity." Marcus didn't question it. He simply unlocked the tablet and turned it toward Elias. "Here. That encrypted message we saw earlier, I ran the header through our in-house filters. It's using a corporate hash system, not standard mobile protocols." Elias's eyes sharpened as he studied the message. It was brief, just a few lines of code embedded within a dummy weather alert. But there was a timestamp. It had been received by Darren exactly 4 minutes before the cart accident. "Who uses this format?" Elias asked. Marcus hesitated. "It's not public." "Only enterprise-level systems use this kind of encryption. It runs through internal server relays, military-grade in some cases. But here's the part that matters." He tapped the corner of the screen, zooming into a barely visible watermark. A stylized crescent symbol flickered into view. Elias's eyes narrowed. "Arc span," he muttered. His heart rate didn't spike, but something in his chest constricted. He had suspected Darren's actions weren't entirely personal, but this confirmed a deeper layer of rot. Arcspan Holdings. The same rival corporation Virion had outbid in 2 major sustainability contracts over the past year. The same company whose former employee had been quietly removed from Virion for breaching internal ethics protocols, Darren's brother. This wasn't just petty vengeance, Elias murmured, more to himself than anyone. This was engineered. Outside the plane, lights flashed as emergency responders arrived, not for Elias, but for protocol. The captain remained inside the cockpit, silent, perhaps aware of the weight now pressing on this flight's record. Marcus stepped away briefly to answer a call. Elias leaned back in his seat, letting the realization sink in. Someone had embedded a saboteur onto his flight, coordinated, timed, and disguised as an unfortunate service mishap. It wasn't enough to discredit him. The timing was too specific. They wanted him shaken. They wanted the Geneva deal disrupted. Marcus returned, holding the phone to his chest. "Andre's online. You want him?" "Now," Elias said, rising with effort. They moved to the jet bridge where privacy was more plausible. Andre Caraway, Virion's lead cybersecurity officer, appeared on the encrypted screen in a dim office lit only by the glow of his monitors. "Elias," Andre said without pleasantries, "I've just backtraced the encryption signature Marcus sent." That message came from a cloaked IP, but we got lucky. It pinged off one of our old subsidiary servers that we never decommissioned. Guess who was trying to mask the signal through our infrastructure? Elias didn't blink. Arcspan. Directly. Through a shell company registered last quarter in the Caymans. But their internal token ID is still active in our firewall logs from when we split servers after the GeoRenew bid. Sloppy work. It's them. The confirmation wasn't a surprise, but the speed with which it came meant something else. If Arcspan had moved this quickly and so publicly, they weren't just targeting Elias, they were making a statement. How many people could have orchestrated this level of access? Elias asked, pacing slowly down the corridor now clear of the passengers. Andre's expression darkened. 4 or 5, tops. All upper executive tier. You're not dealing with rogue actors. This came from the top. Elias turned toward the glass window overlooking the runway. Rain had started to fall, slow and deliberate, streaking the tarmac in gray. Across the way, he saw Darren being loaded into an airport vehicle. Even restrained, the man looked defiant until a sharp clap of thunder cracked overhead, and for a brief second he flinched. Elias tapped his cane once against the floor. The sound echoed faintly in the corridor. "Begin compiling everything," he told Andre. "Text logs, IP traces, timestamps, Darren's employment files, especially the ones Arcspan tried to hide when they funded Altair's logistics branch." Then came the audio. Darren's flat, "Apologies, sir," dripping with insincerity. A second video followed, Darren whispering to a fellow crew member and moments later receiving a text message. The logo at the top of the screen, a cryptic symbol, matched the one Marcus had flagged. Elias remained composed, but he felt the temperature in the room drop. He glanced once at Vincent Greer, the CEO of Arcspan Holdings, seated several rows behind the defense table. The man's jaw was set, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But Elias could see it, the faint twitch in his temple, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. When Darren was called to the stand, the silence deepened. He took the oath with trembling hands, his voice nearly inaudible. I swear to speak the truth." The prosecutor, Mr. Lamar, approached slowly. "Mr. Cole, can you tell this court what you received on your phone shortly before the second incident involving the cart?" Darren shifted in his seat, throat dry. He hesitated. "It was a message. From a contact I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was connected to." "Please clarify," Lamar pressed. Darren swallowed hard. "Arcspan Holdings. I was offered compensation, a position at a subsidiary. All I had to do was escalate a confrontation, make it appear that Mr. Monroe had attacked me, that he had started it. A murmur rippled across the room. Cameras clicked like distant gunfire. Marcus, seated just behind Elias, leaned forward, lips parting in shock, even though he had suspected this all along. Elias didn't flinch. He simply listened. "Who contacted you specifically?" Lamar asked. "I never met him face to face, but the handler identified himself as a contractor working for Greer Solutions, an arc-span shell," Darren confessed, voice cracking now. "He said I'd be protected. That even if things went wrong, Altair Air would clean it up." All eyes turned to Vincent Greer. The CEO shifted in his chair, then stood. "This is ridiculous. I've never authorized—" But his words died as Lucian Ward entered the courtroom from the side door, stepping up to the evidence table with a quiet authority. Elias's former intelligence contact had flown in hours earlier under complete secrecy. Lucien produced a USB drive, handed it to the clerk, and then cleared his throat. "Your Honor, these are logs from internal ArcSpan servers. They show a series of financial transfers from Mr. Greer's personal account to a consultancy firm registered in Liechtenstein. That firm issued payment to Mr. Darren Cole 3 days before the flight." The screen flashed again. Wire logs, time-stamped, names highlighted in red. Greer's face turned a shade paler. This is fabricated." Lucien's eyes narrowed. "I pulled it from your mirrored backup server before it was wiped." "You forgot to secure the test environment." Gasps filled the chamber. The judge motioned for silence. Darren, now completely broken, dropped his gaze to the floor. "It was all planned," he muttered. "The turbulence, the delay, even the seat assignments. They wanted Elias to snap, so the footage would show him as the aggressor. But I couldn't fake it. I couldn't go through with the final part." The judge scribbled something on his pad. "Final part?" Darren nodded slowly. "They told me, if he retaliated, even slightly, to shout, to claim assault, and trigger the airline's emergency protocol, he'd be detained, discredited. Virion's stock would wobble before the Geneva deal. That was the goal. Elias looked at Greer now, not with anger, but with something colder, comprehension. He understood the kind of man who would sacrifice dignity for dominance, who would weaponize another man's pain to climb higher, and he knew the fall would hurt. Lamar turned to Elias. "Mr. Monroe, do you wish to respond?" Elias stood, adjusted the cuff of his jacket, and walked slowly to the witness box. He faced the crowd, his voice calm and clear. "I didn't come here for vengeance. I came here because someone thought my silence could be purchased, my dignity sabotaged, and my story rewritten. But the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs to stand long enough." He turned to Vincent Greer. "The higher you build a lie, the louder it collapses." "I don't do public noise," Lucian said as he sat across from Elias in the penthouse meeting room, scanning the windows automatically. "But I do clean up messes before they turn into funerals." "We're past messes," Elias replied. "We're in the storm." Lucian pulled out a tablet and began to type. "Tell me everything. Start with the flight." As Elias spoke, detailing Darren Cole's sudden aggression, the encrypted message, and the pattern of harassment, Lucian's fingers never stopped moving. His face gave away nothing, no reaction, no surprise, until Elias mentioned the symbol in the message, the one Marcus had recognized from ArcSpan Holdings. Lucian stopped typing. "That's not just a rival's logo," he said. "That's a sigil they use for their shadow protocols. Internal ops? Off-the-record sabotage. What kind of sabotage?" Lucian leaned back. "Accidents. Scandals. Anything that can't be traced back. If Darren hit you with that cart, it wasn't personal. It was a test run." The words landed like a weight across Elias's chest. not because he hadn't suspected it, but because now it was confirmed. Over the next 48 hours, Lucian worked like a machine. He traced metadata from the emails, hacked into satellite timestamps from nearby security cameras, and cross-referenced travel logs of known ArcSpan affiliates. The results were disturbing. 3 other CEOs, all competitors to ArcSpan, had experienced unusual travel disruptions in the past 2 months. One had suffered a mysterious illness after an in-flight meal. Another's security detail had been inexplicably rerouted during a conference, exposing him to potential attack. And a third had nearly died when his private jet lost cabin pressure mid-flight. The official cause? Mechanical failure. Lucien dropped a file on the table in front of Elias. It's a pattern. These aren't accidents. They're calculated destabilizations. You're the first one who didn't crumble. Elias stared at the names, the photos, the dates. Why me? He asked finally. Lucien's voice was quiet but direct. Because you embarrassed them. You fired one of their proxies. You outmaneuvered Darren. They wanted to rattle you, make you panic. Or break. But I didn't, Elias said, his voice low and unwavering. No, Lucian replied, and that's why they'll come harder next time. The room fell silent, the air thick with consequence. Outside, the city of Geneva gleamed under gray skies, but inside, the war had begun. Elias rose and looked out the window, his reflection merging with the city's skyline. He knew there would be more threats, more shadows, but he also knew something deeper. This wasn't just about him anymore. If ArcSpan had built a network that turned sabotage into strategy, it had to be dismantled publicly, piece by piece. They think fear will slow me, Elias said. Lucien stepped beside him. Fear is just their tool. Strategy is ours. Elias nodded, his eyes narrowing. Then we move. Because one thing was now certain, and Elias felt it in every breath, every decision, every echo of pain still lingering in his back. This wasn't a business rivalry. It was a war. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's strategy wearing patience. The courtroom doors swung open with a sudden creak as Elias Monroe stepped inside, flanked by his legal counsel and a silent wave of media anticipation trailing behind him like smoke. He moved steadily down the center aisle, every camera light flashing off his suit like sparks striking steel. The Geneva High Business Tribunal chamber was packed, row upon row of observers, executives, journalists, and attorneys. Yet, amidst the noise, Elias's mind was silent, focused. Every step forward echoed with the weight of what he was about to expose. He took his place at the front without hesitation, eyes settling on the far side of the room where Darren Cole sat, hunched and pale, flanked by court officers. The flight attendant who once grinned while ramming a drink cart into his spine now looked like a shadow of himself, lips tight, eyes bloodshot, fingers clenching the hem of his suit as if it were the only thing holding him together. The presiding judge, a tall, gray-bearded man named Magistrate Roulant, banged his gavel once and called the hearing to order. This tribunal will hear testimony and review evidence regarding the alleged sabotage of Mr. Elias Monroe aboard Altair Air Flight 719. Witnesses will approach in order. The prosecution wasted no time. A flat-screen monitor lit up behind the bench, and the first video played. Grainy but clear footage from Elias's AI-enhanced cabin feed. The court watched as Darren's cart collided brutally into Elias's back. There was a collective intake of breath in the room. By morning, major networks were broadcasting a compiled timeline of the attack, overlaid with internal documents and visual data. News anchors replayed the moment Darren's cart slammed into Elias's back, followed by the eerily timed encrypted message flashing across Darren's device. Social media exploded. The public demanded accountability. Raymond Vass, still trying to salvage Altair Air's reputation, issued a carefully worded press statement. Altair was unaware of any external manipulation. We condemn any malicious use of our staffing systems, but the truth had already begun to seep out like oil through cracked pavement. Arcspan Holdings had quietly invested in Altair's logistics branch 9 months ago, granting them limited but privileged access to back-end systems, enough to influence crew assignments, data clearance, and employee movement. It was a strategic foothold masked as a financial partnership, a parasite feeding through spreadsheets. Elias stared at the flight manifest again. One more name stood out. A catering technician, first shift, last-minute substitution. His record, too, seemed scrubbed. No background data, no address. The deeper Elias dug, the more he found missing. It was no longer a theory. Darren wasn't alone. Marcus leaned on the edge of the desk, arms crossed. "How many more do you think?" Elias didn't answer right away. His gaze was locked on the final frame of the surveillance footage, the moment Darren's eyes flicked toward Elias before impact. Not hatred, not panic, just completion, like a man finishing a task he didn't fully understand. "One broken wheel," Elias finally said, his voice low, had turned an entire machine of deceit. He rammed a heavy drink cart into a CEO's back, grinning as the man fell in pain. If you believe every abuse of power must be answered, hit subscribe now. Justice doesn't serve drinks, it serves consequences. The first call came at 2:37 a.m. Elias jolted awake, the glow of his phone slicing through the darkness like a blade. No caller ID. Just a number, blocked, masked, silent. He let it ring out. Then again, 5 minutes later. Same number. Same silence. He answered this time. There was no voice, only breathing. Slow, deliberate, and patient. "Who is this?" Elias demanded, his voice low but steady. The line clicked off. He stared at the ceiling of his Geneva suite, heart pounding not from fear, but calculation. This wasn't random. The message was clear. They were watching. He set the phone down and sat on the edge of the bed, one hand gripping his cane, the other resting on his knee as he thought through the implications. The attack on the plane had escalated into something far deeper, something coordinated. The next morning, a sleek black sedan idled near the curb outside the Virion European offices. The same sedan appeared 3 times that week. No plates, tinted windows, never stayed longer than 10 minutes, always during Elias's private strategy meetings. It wasn't coincidence. When he confronted the hotel concierge about it, the man just blinked. "Sir, we have no record of any vehicle matching that description checking in. Perhaps a guest." "Perhaps," Elias murmured, but he didn't believe it. The message wasn't just fear, it was precision. Marcus noticed the strain behind Elias's composed exterior. "You need protection," he said one evening, locking the conference room after everyone else had left. "These aren't idle threats. Someone's testing how far you'll go." "I know how far I'll go," Elias replied without looking up. "The question is, how far are they willing to fall?" That night, another encrypted email arrived in Elias's private inbox. The subject line read, "You're being warned. Step off." The body of the message was a single video, an aerial shot of a plane nosediving, cutting to black before impact. No sender address, just one line beneath the footage. He was lucky. You won't be. Marcus slammed his laptop shut the moment he saw it. "We need to call someone. This isn't a rivalry, it's an operation." Elias nodded slowly, then pulled a name from the deepest recesses of his memory. Someone he'd worked with years ago on a cross-border intellectual property case involving espionage in Asia-Pacific markets. "Lucien Ward," he said. "I want him here in 24 hours." Lucien arrived the next morning. Mid-50s, lean, gray streaks slicing through his short hair like scars. He wore no tie, just a simple black jacket and a presence that drew silence. A former intelligence officer, now a private contractor specializing in corporate infiltration. He carried a battered laptop case, a metal pen clipped to his sleeve, and eyes that missed nothing. "You're thinking legal?" Andre asked. "No," Elias replied. "I'm thinking strategy. Let's not drag this into a court unless we need to. I want leverage, I want control, and most of all, I want them to know I saw them coming." Marcus stepped beside him, eyes steady, voice calm. "You think they'll try again?" Elias didn't answer immediately. His eyes followed the clouds rolling over Geneva's skyline beyond the terminal glass. "If someone wanted war," he said finally, voice cold and resolute, "I'd answer with precision, not rage." The inquiry began before the plane's engines had even cooled. At the Geneva International Terminal, within hours of landing, Swiss aviation authorities secured the aircraft for review. Uniformed officers moved with quiet urgency, questioning crew and passengers, sealing off the first-class cabin. Outside, a drizzle streaked across the tarmac as airport vehicles blinked in slow motion beneath the gray sky. Inside the terminal, Altair Air executives scrambled to get ahead of the storm that was rapidly building beyond their control. Elias Monroe stood near the glass exit doors, his posture upright despite the pain pulsing down his back. He leaned slightly on his cane but didn't betray weakness. Marcus Devereaux hovered nearby, tablet in hand, eyes fixed on the incoming feed of articles and headlines exploding across international media. Elias's legal team had moved quickly. The cabin footage, securely uploaded from his private server, was already circulating among trusted journalists. Clean, watermarked, time stamped, unarguable. By midday, the first headline hit: CEO assaulted mid-flight, Arcspan Holdings implicated in sabotage? Elias read the text slowly, eyes narrowing. He had predicted blowback, but the speed at which the story spread surprised even him. Inside a hastily arranged conference room at the airport's executive wing, Altair Air's management sat stiffly across from Geneva's Aviation Oversight Committee. Darren Cole had been removed from the plane in handcuffs, still dazed and bleeding. His co-attendants had given disjointed statements, some trying to paint the incident as accidental, others nervously glancing at the door like someone might burst in at any second. A senior representative from Altair, a man named Raymond Vass, cleared his throat and addressed the assembled officials. "This appears to be an isolated service failure," he said, his voice oiled with rehearsed diplomacy. "We are fully cooperating with authorities. Safety and professionalism are our highest priorities." Elias didn't flinch, but Marcus's jaw tightened. "Tell them," Elias said under his breath. Marcus turned the tablet around, showing an email thread from a whistleblower inside Arcspan's logistics department. The final message included a chilling attachment, a staff transfer form with Darren Cole's falsified employee ID. The signature was forged. The form had never gone through Altair's official HR system. Someone had planted Darren into the airline's crew roster. "This," Marcus whispered, "isn't just sabotage. It's infiltration." Later that evening, in his suite overlooking Lake Geneva, Elias sat at the edge of the bed, the tablet screen lighting his face in cold blue. The headlines continued to roll in, each more damning than the last. Public sympathy leaned heavily in his favor. Still, Elias knew better than to celebrate too early. He opened a folder labeled Tier 2 Findings. Inside were 3 key documents. First, a server log showing back-end access from an IP range registered to Arcspan Holdings. Second, a series of blank HR entries tied to unverified employee profiles. And third, a digital certificate that had been used to encrypt a text message received by Darren just minutes before the attack. The sender, a masked address routed through Arcspan's proxy server. Marcus entered quietly with coffee and placed it on the table. "They're trying to put out the fire," he said, "but we already lit the next fuse." Elias nodded slowly. "And we keep tracing the sparks." His phone vibrated. A secure message from one of his cybersecurity leads popped up. Tracing complete. Arcspan owns a minority stake in Altair Air Logistics. Board-level access confirmed Elias exhaled, his breath visible against the chilled window pane. That explained everything. Why Darren had clearance, why his records passed scrutiny, why his actions were never flagged. It had never been about Darren alone. It was systemic. At 2:13 a.m., Elias joined a live call with Geneva authorities and his legal team. The lead investigator, a pragmatic man named Armand Keller, appeared on screen. His voice was calm but heavy. "We have enough to begin the inquiry against Arcspan," he said. "The airline is claiming ignorance." Elias leaned forward. "Then we give them facts they can't ignore." The ruling came swiftly. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the judge's gavel struck the wooden block, echoing like a final verdict against deceit itself. Cameras clicked furiously, journalists whispered into recorders, and the representatives of Arcspan Holdings sat frozen, expressions caught between disbelief and despair. Vincent Greer, once a symbol of ruthless corporate power, now looked hollow, the weight of his empire's collapse visible in his trembling hands. "Arcspan Holdings is hereby found guilty of corporate conspiracy, industrial sabotage, and attempted assault," the judge declared, his voice sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. "Sanctions, full audit, and criminal proceedings will commence immediately." The words landed like hammer blows. Within minutes, social media buzzed with headlines, stock tickers plunged, and Arcspan's once stable name became synonymous with disgrace. Elias Monroe sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, his eyes fixed on the documents before him, not out of detachment, but discipline. He didn't look at Greer or at Darren Cole, the man who had turned a drink cart into a weapon. Darren sat several rows away, head lowered, flanked by guards. The plea deal had reduced his sentence, but not the weight of his guilt. 2 years in prison awaited him, though his testimony had exposed a darker network, corporations trading acts of sabotage like business favors. Elias listened quietly as the charges were read, his thoughts a blend of justice and exhaustion. Around him, Marcus Devereux, his loyal assistant, exhaled slowly, finally allowing himself to relax after months of relentless preparation. "It's over," Marcus whispered. Elias's response was steady. "No," he said, eyes still forward. "It's only contained." Not over. His tone carried the quiet certainty of a man who understood that corruption rarely dies, it simply changes form. When the court adjourned, a storm of reporters gathered outside. Flashbulbs lit the marble steps as microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Monroe, do you have any comment on Arcspan's collapse?" one shouted. "Do you believe Darren Cole acted alone?" asked another. Elias paused briefly at the top of the steps, his posture composed despite the pain that still lingered in his back. "This case wasn't about revenge," he said, his voice clear against the noise. "It was about accountability. About ensuring that no company, no individual, hides malice behind protocol." He didn't wait for more questions. With Marcus beside him, he moved through the crowd like a shadow cutting through chaos, the Geneva wind sharp against his face. Hours later, the city's skyline glimmered in reflection across the hotel window. The world outside moved on. Cars whispered along wet streets, the faint hum of distant traffic rising and fading. Inside, Elias stood alone, his cane resting beside the table. The faint ache in his back was a constant reminder of how close he had come to breaking, not just physically, but in spirit. He loosened his tie and stared at the reflection of his own eyes in the glass. The man staring back was different, colder perhaps, but also clearer in purpose. The fight had stripped away illusion. Every deal, every handshake, every boardroom promise now seemed fragile compared to the violence of truth. Marcus entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of black coffee. "News channels can't stop running the verdict," he said, placing one on the desk. "Arcspan stock is in free fall. Their investors are already pulling out." Elias gave a faint nod, his gaze still on the horizon. It was bound to happen. Lies have a shelf life. Marcus hesitated, studying him. "You should be proud," he said softly. "You stood your ground and won." Elias turned, his expression unreadable but steady. "We didn't win, Marcus. We prevented loss." His words hung heavy in the quiet room. He took the coffee, sipped once, and then placed it down untouched. "We don't celebrate surviving. We rebuild stronger." The clock ticked gently in the background as Elias walked toward his desk, opening his tablet. The screen's glow illuminated the determined set of his face. He began typing rapidly, drafting the first outlines of what would become Virion's next great project, a transparency platform where data could reveal corporate deceit before it turned into harm. Every report, every pattern, every hidden transaction would be recorded and verified. The same AI tools that had captured his assault would now expose those who preyed on silence. His fingers paused for a moment over the keyboard. The path ahead would be long, and enemies would adapt, but this time the system would be his ally, not his target. Marcus leaned against the window, watching his employer with quiet admiration. "You're already thinking of what's next," he said. Elias smiled faintly. "Always," he replied. "That's the only way we stay ahead of the ones who still think they can control the narrative." A moment passed between them, a silent understanding that the battle had shifted from the courtroom to the digital realm. Outside, the lights of Geneva shimmered like constellations scattered across the ground. The reflection of the city in the window made it look as though the stars themselves had fallen at Elias's feet. He closed the document and saved it under a single name: Project Virion Shield. It wasn't about vengeance or validation. It was about prevention, building systems that outlived outrage. He looked out at the night one last time before switching off the lamp. Justice means nothing unless it builds something new. The footage paused at the exact frame Elias had come to dread, and now confront. The cart, the moment, the strike. Frozen on the screen before him, Darren's drink trolley hovered mid-motion, seconds before slamming into his spine. Elias sat still, bathed in the cold light of the conference room monitor, Kane resting by his chair, fingers laced under his chin. He leaned forward, shoulders tight, eyes narrowed not with anger, but with clinical focus. The room around him was dark, the blinds drawn. Only the blue-white glow of the paused video lit his face, casting sharp lines across his jaw, his brow, his scars. He pressed play. The cart hit. His body jolted. The sound, muted in reality but sharp in memory, rang in his bones. Elias didn't flinch this time. He watched himself brace, twist, and then slowly rise with control he barely remembered having. From the doorframe, Marcus stood silently, arms crossed, a worried crease between his eyebrows. He had seen his boss grow increasingly distant these last few weeks. More focused, yes, but also colder. Elias hadn't spoken much lately about the flight, or the case, or Arcspan's collapse. But here he was again, watching that same 6 seconds of footage over and over. Not seeking vengeance, something else. "You're not punishing yourself again, are you?" Marcus asked gently, stepping into the room. Elias exhaled through his nose, neither dismissing nor confirming. "I'm studying," he said quietly, pausing the footage once more. "Trying to understand the system that made him." Marcus approached, his footsteps echoing faintly on the polished floor. He looked at the screen and then at Elias. "You already exposed them. The tribunal ruled. The media ran wild. You changed everything. Isn't that enough?" Elias shook his head slowly. It wasn't just Darren. He was the symptom, not the disease. He rewound the footage to the moment Darren received the message, the encrypted text, the glance, the shift in posture. Look at his eyes. Right there. That's when he knew what he was about to do. And he did it with full confidence that no one would stop him, because the structure behind him rewarded silence and punished resistance. He stood, stiffly, the cane now supporting most of his weight. The faint sound of city traffic murmured through the double-glazed windows. Outside, night had fully fallen over Geneva. "I keep thinking," Elias continued, "if no one had recorded it, if Marcus hadn't acted fast, if I had shouted or reacted violently, they would have buried it, labeled me the aggressor. Darren would have walked free and I'd be painted unstable." He turned to his assistant. "That's the machine I want to dismantle." Marcus didn't argue. He knew better. Elias's pace was slow but steady as he moved to the sideboard and poured a glass of water. "I keep hearing it," he said suddenly. "The wheels. That low rumble on the carpet. The click of the brakes. Every time I hear a cart in a hotel hallway or someone dragging luggage down an airport terminal," he trailed off. "It comes back." Marcus lowered his gaze. "You never told anyone you still hear it." Elias offered a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Some things don't need to be told to be true." The silence between them settled like dust, heavy but honest. After a moment, Elias returned to the screen and played the footage one last time. Not the moment of impact, but just after. His own face, bruised but composed. Darren's shock, the murmurs from passengers, and then his own words. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." Elias turned off the monitor. "He thought that cart was just metal and wheels," Elias said quietly. "But it was more. It was an extension of a broken hierarchy, a weapon handed down by men in suits who never got their hands dirty. That's the part I can't let go." Marcus stepped forward, pulling out a slim folder from his bag. "Then maybe this helps." He laid it on the table. "Testimony invites from the World Trade Ethics Commission. They want you to speak. Not about the case, about reform." Elias didn't respond immediately. He opened the folder, scanning the letter. His name, his credentials, his scars. He looked up. "They want a symbol. They want a blueprint," Marcus corrected, "and they trust you to draw it." Elias sat again, slower this time. The ache in his back reminded him of the cost, but the fire in his eyes burned clearer than it had in weeks. "Then we give them one," he said, "but not a story about pain. A strategy, systems analysis, exposure through verified patterns, transparency through data, not drama." Marcus smiled, relieved to see the fight returning to his friend's voice. "Just make sure you don't lose yourself chasing justice." "I already did," Elias said, "but I found something sharper in the process." He picked up the remote and clicked off the monitor for good. Later that week, as Elias prepared to fly out again, a journalist caught him outside his Geneva office. Cameras flashed, reporters crowded. One leaned forward with a recorder. "Mr. Monroe, if I may, how did you endure such public humiliation and betrayal with such calm composure? You didn't lash out. You didn't retaliate. What kept you from breaking?" Elias adjusted his cufflink, glanced calmly at the journalist, and answered without pause. "Dignity is the sharpest weapon. They never see it coming." The lights were too bright. Elias Monroe stepped into the Altair Air Training Center under a curtain of flashing bulbs and swarming microphones. Cameras tracked his every step like vultures circling, eager for a headline. He moved with precision, his gait even, though the black carbon cane in his right hand clicked faintly with each step. It wasn't for show. The pain still lived in the deepest corners of his spine, less of a wound now, more a whisper. But this day wasn't about pain. Not entirely. A man in a pressed gray suit with a badge that read Director Kellen Roach approached briskly, flanked by a younger assistant holding a tablet. "Mr. Monroe, we're honored." "Truly," Roach said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Elias's grip was firm, his face unreadable. "I almost didn't." Kellen offered a tight, rehearsed smile. "Well, the board insisted your presence would mean a great deal. For morale, for the press, and for legitimacy." Elias caught the hesitation in that final word. For legitimacy. He understood. Without him, the entire narrative unraveled. Marcus Devereaux appeared from behind, having quietly declined press interviews outside. He wore the same sharp navy as always, but his eyes watched every shadow. They both knew this event was not just a celebration, it was a test of sincerity. The air smelled faintly of floor polish and coffee, but beneath it lingered a sharper scent. Corporate redemption dressed in glossy banners. As they entered the new simulation wing, Elias's eyes swept across glass panels displaying phrases like empathy in action, accountability is airborne, and every passenger matters. On one screen, a looping video showed a flight attendant gently helping a senior passenger with mobility issues. Overacted, yes, but clearly produced with good intentions. "Initiatives based on your recommendations," Kellen said proudly. "We overhauled training. New modules, bias testing, live scenario reviews. We even implemented a reporting system where staff can escalate concerns anonymously." No more silence. Elias nodded slowly. "And background checks?" "Expanded. We now audit personnel history quarterly. Anyone flagged for misconduct is suspended pending internal review." There was no need to say Darren's name. It hovered, unspoken but thick in the room. The tour moved through reconstructed mock cabins. Elias ran his fingers along the edge of a new drink cart. Lightweight, smoother, reinforced to prevent forceful movement in turbulence. Engineers called it an incident-resistant redesign. Elias simply called it overdue. A younger trainee, perhaps in his early 20s, stood nervously near the rear exit of the cabin. His face flushed when he saw Elias approaching. "Mr. Monroe, sir," the trainee said, voice cracking slightly. "I just wanted to say, your story, it changed everything for guys like me. I mean, I joined because I wanted to be part of something respectful, safe. And now, we actually have rules that make sense." Elias studied him a moment. The boy couldn't have been more than 19. He wore the uniform with pride but carried the uncertainty of someone new to pain, new to witnessing injustice. Elias's gaze softened. "What's your name?" "Jasper, sir." Jasper Keene. Elias nodded once. "Remember something, Jasper. Uniforms don't earn respect. Actions do." Jasper straightened, visibly moved. "Yes, sir." "Thank you." As the group moved on, a journalist tried to intercept Elias, shoving a mic in his path. "Mr. Monroe, would you say this event proves Altair Air has turned a new leaf? Do you believe these reforms are real?" Elias paused just long enough to make the silence feel loaded. "I believe sincerity isn't measured by speeches or ceremonies. It's measured by the quiet choices no one sees." The mic lowered slowly. Marcus leaned in. "You ready for the final stop?" Elias exhaled. "Lead the way." They entered the final wing of the center, a glass-encased atrium overlooking a row of live training modules. In one, a group of flight attendants rehearsed a conflict de-escalation scenario. In another, a simulated turbulence drill. This was the heart of the new program, where change wasn't just promised, it was tested. Marcus stood beside him. "Do you regret coming?" Elias shook his head. "No. Regret is a luxury I can't afford. But it's strange, seeing pain turned into policy. You made that possible." "No. The truth made it possible. I just refused to sit down when it hit me in the back." They stood in silence for a moment, watching a training supervisor calmly instruct a recruit on the ethics module. Then Elias turned, preparing to leave. As they moved toward the exit, another trainee, this one barely older than Jasper, approached timidly, eyes flicking between Elias's cane and his face. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said, swallowing hard. "If you don't mind me asking, why do you still carry that cane? Didn't the doctors say you were mostly recovered?" Elias stopped. His fingers tightened slightly around the cane's handle. He looked at the boy, no malice in the question, only curiosity, and then shifted his weight just enough to let the metal tip echo softly against the marble floor. He gave a small smile. "A reminder," Elias said, tapping it lightly. "That strength doesn't mean never falling. It means standing back up and building guardrails for others." Elias Monroe stepped onto the stage as the lights dimmed and the spotlight followed his every move. The conference hall in Oslo was packed. Executives, policymakers, and journalists from around the world sat in reverent silence. A massive screen behind him pulsed to life, bearing the emblem of Virion Systems, now known globally not just as a tech powerhouse, but as a symbol of principled resistance. The title across the glowing screen read, "Integrity in Motion." The applause was thunderous, but Elias barely registered it. His eyes swept across the crowd with composed precision. His posture was straight, his stride measured, but the cane in his left hand tapped gently against the floor, a silent reminder of what had brought him here. He approached the clear podium slowly, pausing for just a beat before setting the cane aside. The microphone hissed softly as he leaned in. "Years ago," Elias began, his voice calm and deliberate, "I boarded a flight expecting silence and strategy. Instead, I faced something far uglier. What began as an act of personal malice turned out to be the tip of a deeper rot in the systems we trusted." A few murmurs rose from the crowd, then quieted. He continued, "This initiative, Integrity in Motion, isn't just software. It's not another product. It's a promise, a network of tools that ensures transparency where manipulation once thrived." Behind him, images shifted, airlines implementing new accountability tech, logistics centers with smart monitoring systems, biometric clearance zones with built-in ethics alerts. The footage paused on a still photo, a flight cabin. Elias's eyes darkened slightly. He didn't look back at the screen, but his hand clenched the podium briefly. Then he released it. "This started with a drink cart. With a man who saw a target, not a passenger. With silence that almost swallowed the truth, he paused as a subtle tension filled the room. Then his voice sharpened. And it nearly worked, because most things like that do." Gasps from the front row. A man in a Navy business suit adjusted his tie uneasily. Elias scanned their expressions, sensing the weight his words carried. But he wasn't here to point fingers. He was here to hold up a mirror. He shifted the pace. "What changed?" he asked softly. "Not vengeance. Not courtroom victories. But proof. Cold, undeniable proof. The recordings. The digital trails. The chain of decisions exposed by precision. And most of all, witnesses who refused to stay quiet. Marcus Devereaux stood quietly in the wings of the stage, arms crossed, jaw tense with pride. He remembered the flight too well, remembered the sound of the cart slamming, the sickening crack, the silence that followed. But today, he watched Elias command the room not as a victim, but as a builder. On screen, the audience saw a live dashboard of the new Virion initiative. Green lights pulsed beside the names of partnered airlines, governments, labor unions. Each symbol a pledge, each pulse a promise. Elias's tone softened again. "We didn't build this to punish. We built it to protect. We built it so no worker would be weaponized, so no passenger would have to record their own pain to be believed." He stepped back from the podium and turned fully to the audience now, letting them see him not as a CEO, but as a man who had endured. "And yes," he said, "we know not everyone will welcome this change." Systems rooted in secrecy often fight transparency, but that only proves how necessary it is. Another ripple moved through the room. A few hands lifted phones quietly, capturing this moment. Elias walked slowly toward the edge of the stage, unscripted now, gaze piercing. I've been asked many times why I never fought back, why I didn't strike the man who hurt me. But strength isn't in how hard you hit. It's in how loud your truth rings when the noise dies down. His hand tightened on the cane again, not for support, but for emphasis. He looked out across the silent auditorium, and the next words came with perfect clarity. Sometimes they try to crush you with wheels. But if you endure, those same wheels can drive change forward. The hall erupted, not just with applause but with standing silence first, a beat of awe before noise could catch up. And in that breathless stillness, it was clear to everyone watching. When truth rolls, even broken paths lead home. He crushed a man's spine with hatred and soon felt his own face meet steel. If you believe strength means standing for what's right, subscribe now, because justice never stops rolling. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights racism, abuse of power, and the strength it takes to confront injustice. Its purpose is to raise awareness, provoke empathy, and inspire reflection on equality, accountability, and human dignity.